Welcome to another episode of Judge for Yourself. There has been much debate recently around executive pay and the growing wage gap in South Africa. But in fact, there's been a greater debate. You must remember that our constitution enshrines the concept of equality. And one of the issues that has now been put on the agenda by the French economist Thomas Piketty is what he suggests is a very growing and disturbing inequality in the world economies. In fact, he suggests that it's the greatest since before the First World War. In the South African context, of course, the issue has been exacerbated by perhaps the longest strike that we've had on the Platinum Belt, where workers are striking for a minimum wage of 12,500 rand per month. So this issue of inequality in wages has now become a very important question. If you'd like to join this debate on Twitter, please use the hashtag #JFYWageGap. To discuss this topic, which is an important one, we're joined by Maipaile, the Deputy Secretary-General of the South African Communist Party, Professor Roger Southall, Head of Sociology Department at Wits, Chris Hart, Economist for Investment Solutions, and Vivian Atud, Independent Economist previously with the Free Market Foundation. Before I start, let me just recall what the Amplat CEO, Chris Griffiths, who added fuel to the fire when he defended his 17.6 million rand annual salary, while 70,000 workers were on strike for a pay hike of 150,000 per annum. He was quoted as saying, "Am I getting paid on a fair basis for what I'm having to deal with in this company? Must I run this company and deal with all this nonsense for nothing? I'm at work. I'm not on strike. I'm not demanding to be paid what I'm not worth." Well, that's a fairly provocative statement, Chris Hart.
Yeah, and I think this
let's just talk about context here. We have the worst Gini coefficient which measures inequality of any country in the world.
Namibia is apparently worse.
Well, on the latest World Bank study that I saw, we were actually the worst at 0.69, yes, which is a very high ratio. It doesn't matter, one or two. We're very high.
Yes, it is very high.
So you get a CEO who says this in the middle of a strike. I mean, that seems to me pretty irresponsible, but I'm not here to charge Chris Griffiths. I'm much more interested in the general context here.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of contexts here. Firstly, is how do we judge ourselves? We're never objective when we're trying to evaluate ourselves. That's one thing. The second is what value do we add in a business? And a lot of it is quite subjective. In that there's certain ways of cutting, slicing and dicing that, and that's for the general pay matrix that you actually have in a company, etc.
Just guide me here. We do have a disturbing level of inequality. We have the worst Gini, well, first or second, doesn't really matter. Piketty, for example, has now become the rage, and rightly so. I hope my viewers read some of that book. It's an important text. It's talking about greater forms of inequality. And we are now in the midst of an unbelievable strike. So what do we do about it? Because Mr. Griffiths will say, which essentially is echoed, I'm not suggesting you arguing that, well, $1.7 million isn't too high. I mean, after all, if I was in America, I'd be earning perhaps $5 million.
Well, we have our CEOs rank only second to the USA in the amount that they are paid.
Even if I took it into dollars? Or are you talking about cost of living?
I'm talking about purchasing power parity.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, it is remarkable that in a country with this huge level of inequality that our CEOs are so well paid. There's a lot of talk about the skills crisis and so forth, but then again we find constantly that CEOs really aren't going to respond by working harder for the latest million. They're going to be working hard because they're interested in the job. They're already well paid, and frankly the levels we've got to are quite obscene. Do you know the Labour Research Service in 2012 found the disparity between CEOs in the top companies and the lowest paid workers was 1 to 257. Frankly, I would say it's unacceptable in any country, and in this country, it's totally disgusting.
What do you say?
I would
If
say...
you work for the Free Market Foundation, I'm assuming you think it's fine.
No, I would say at the Free Market Foundation, everybody there has their own mindset, and I have my own
Good, fine.
mind.
No, I'm not trying to categorize you, and I apologize certainly. I was being provocative.
And looking at executive pay in the context of neoclassical economic theory, you would be able to say it's been justified in South Africa and in the US and in many other countries in the world, saying that executives are paid based on their contribution or value added to the company. But then you start asking yourself, I think Chris echoed that, how do we calculate this value? And in many countries are battling to say whether are executives paid market rates, and which says that if you don't pay that amount of money, they're going to leave and go to competitors, and then the company comes down. And other arguments say that if they were overpaid, then the company should be suffering.
What would you suggest we do?
Well,
because I'm assuming that as a member of the South African Communist Party, you're hardly going to tell me that it's fine to have a 17.6 million rand.
No, of course, it's not fine. It's not fine at all. I mean,
but I accept that. So I'm asking, what would you do?
Well, the practical issue here is the structural foundation of our economy, and also the response of business to the transformation that the country is undertaking. And I think that business has not come to the party.
What party do you think they should come to?
They should have embraced the way the wealth creators, which are workers, pay them well, share in the wealth, and that's how you can also create more purchasing power in generally in society.
Mr. Griffiths will probably say to me, if he was here, well, even if I went down to R1 million a year, or R500,000 a year, you took my 17 million and you divided it amongst all my workers, they just get a couple of bob.
That also goes beyond him per se as an individual. It goes to sharing of profits with the workers. So if the companies agree that in a country where, for instance, workers are earning too low wages, the maximum, they can cut part of their profits to give back to the workers. In that way, you also encourage workers to participate and to become more productive. And this has not been happening. And in fact...
sorry, can I just get this right? Are you suggesting that one of the solutions here is a profit-sharing scheme?
In areas where it has been applied, I think it has been quite successful.
Okay, I want to put it on the table. That's what I want to do. I need to take a break, and then I'll come back to all of you.
News that moves. ENCA.com.